Hello and welcome to session 19. I, as always, am Mr. Fowler. I'm joined today by Madison, and we're going to take a look at a few things related to this argument paper and how to prep that up and get the ball rolling, so to speak. So first of all, I'm going to click on the share screen option, and I'm going to go over the session notes for today. Obviously, with the preview and review, we start every day with a preview and review. So let's do the preview. We've got a Zoom meeting, of course, which we are starting right now. We're going to talk about ways to access the best sources for your essay. And then we're going to talk a little bit about last week's assigned readings from Ready Player One. Many of you have finished the text or are still working on it. But today we're going to talk about going into the belly of the beast and Wade's time he spends undercover in IOI. The rest of the class meeting time I'm going to give over to you as a kind of argumentative writing lab opportunity. Remember that we are writing the argumentative paper today. And all of this week with an objective of turning that in by Saturday evening. I know that's a little bit outside the realm of normalcy, but it's a longer paper, so I wanted to give you as long as I possibly could. And that's again by midnight on Saturday. Hopefully you get it done before then. So back to the review, we wanted to, again, focus on the argument essay rubric. And just go ahead and review the Kishwaukee College Library Access methodology, because a couple of you have asked about that. So real quickly, and if I go too fast, you can certainly email me directly. But you can see that I'm right here on the session homepage for our course. And if I click one pane, a single pane back, you'll see that I enter the employee homepage. Now, obviously for you, this will look a little bit different. It will be your student homepage, but the formatting should be relatively similar. And under this 3-bar line over here on the far left-hand side of your screen, you should see an option that says menu. Hovering over that, we'll review a link to your KC website, student information, and then a whole host of drop-down menus. If you go to the drop-down menu that's marked as student resources, so 1, 2, 3, about the third one down, and click on that, it will open up an even larger drop-down menu. And I think it's the 8th link down says it's a link to the library. So let me count that real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There it is, exactly, number 8. So if you click on that link to the library, it'll open up the library homepage here at Kish. And again, I've gone over this many times already, but I'll just want to go over it one more time because I did have a student ask a question about it. There is a link to both the EBSCOhost database and opposing viewpoints. Use opposing viewpoints if you're just starting to consider what topic you might want to use as a research issue for this larger paper. It might give you some broader perspectives that you can use to align yourself with in either for or against a particular view on a complex topic. And again, the full text option is always an excellent one to use because you can print or save the digital files to your computer and you can have them available for your own perusal during your research. So for example, if you're talking about internet or distance learning during COVID-19, You can put those words into a Galen context, opposing viewpoints, web search, and you only get a couple of sources. That would be a good starting point, perhaps, because this is still a relatively new topic. Now, by contrast, if you have an idea already firmly in your mind, you can use EBSCOhost instead. And for EBSCOhost, you can simply type in a topic, and then you use the parameters available to focus your research into something a bit more palatable. So for example, if you typed in a research question like, or research topic like video games and sedentary lifestyle, we'll just see what the results are. They're probably going to come back with several results, and not too bad on the start with this one. Only 664. You may be able to limit that pretty quickly, but you can limit it even more specifically to full text available online, and it will update the results. And now you've got 286, and you can limit it to scholarly journals because you're going to want the best potential results for your study, the best, most trustworthy sources. And that's what we're talking about today when I refer to trustworthy sources. And again, it didn't limit it that much. 286 is still quite a few to go, but you can limit it a little bit by jumping the dates ahead. So if we go back only as far as 2010, I went to 2004, and we changed it quite a bit. So 2011, when the book was published, that's close enough. And now our final result list is something like 205. Still a very dense bit of research to do, but you can expand or limit your terms here, or you can scan through, I think, with some of the sources, and within a good chunk of an hour to 2 hours, you should be able to find some helpful sources that match up with your interests. Okay. So like I said, I did want to just go ahead and review that with you real quickly because I feel that that's important to being successful. The other thing I wanted to highlight for you real quickly is that if after you've done some research and you're just struggling a little bit to find out how do I get started? How do I begin this process? We have a sample argument paper here. This one is on the course website dealing with social media and how we develop skills. We have other sample argumentative papers dealing with social media, virtual goods, and the future of disease. So it covers a pretty wide gamut of the potential topics that we could write about for the purposes of this essay. Alrighty, that is that covers the basics of what I wanted to say today for our course homepage. So therefore, I feel that unless Madison has questions, we're going to go ahead and move into the discussion for today regarding the text. So any new questions in light of that review, Madison?
No.
Okay. So I'm going to stop my video, but you should still hear my audio for quite a bit of time. The reason I'm doing that again is not to isolate you, but I have heard that for Zoom meetings, see, a message has popped up, said my internet connection is unstable. I think it makes the transfer of information a little easier. So we'll go ahead and stop the video. But you can still hear me, right, Madison?
Yeah,
Okay, fantastic.
I can hear you.
Marvelous. So when we left off, I think we were around chapter 27, correct? In our discussion?
Sounds right.
Okay. So just as a point of review, chapter 27 introduces the third puzzle, or the third key, the crystal key, and it's pretty straightforward. He defeats the final challenge to get the for the Jade Gate, and that's to play through and defeat a particularly difficult video game called Black Tiger. This was surprising, though, because Black Tiger required him to immerse himself in a three-dimensional version of a two-dimensional game. And his newly realized or newly refined physicality actually ends up serving him well, because he's got to complete this. He has to complete this challenge by completing a number of physical challenges. When he completes the game, the standard credits for the game designers and engineers runs through the system. However, at the end, he sees an 8-bit graphic detail that is new to this version. And it is a pentagram within a circle, which he realizes is the cover of an album from the 80s, specifically the album 2121 from the band Rush. So he knows that there is a backstory to this album, that it's themed. Now, real quickly, I'll dive into the background of that album a bit. The album is based on a book by Ayn Rand, or Anne Rand, as she's sometimes referred to. And it is a book that she wrote in the middle of one of the larger pieces that she's known for. I think it was Atlas Shrugged. She'd already written The Fountainhead at this point, a lengthy novel of its own merits. And then she went on to write her other great piece, which is Atlas Shrugged. But Atlas Shrugged, I guess, was a little bit difficult in terms of the writing process. So in the middle of that, she actually took a break and wrote this book called I think it's called The Temple of Syrinx. And that's what the album by Rush is based on. So it's a kind of society, kind of like a totalistic society, where all art and music has been done away with. And the story of the album is about a man who finds a cave full of old musical artifacts, including a guitar. And he learns to play these instruments and brings back music to the world. So Wade knows the Oasis well enough to know that there is a planet called what I just said, and it escapes me right away. Syrinx. There we go. So he knows that there is a temple, or a planet rather, called Syrinx, and he travels there. Within that place, there is a large 7-part song that unfolds as told by the authors of that particular piece, the band Rush. And so he goes to the temple there in Syrinx, and he knows that he has to complete an offering to the temple of Syrinx. And what he realizes is that beyond the waterfall, at the altar in the temple of Syrinx, he finds a an actual sword in the stone, except instead of a sword in the stone, recalling his Arthurian origins as the hunter Percival, he finds that it's a guitar, an electric guitar, and he writes or explains specifically on page 263 that it was an electric guitar, and he recognized its design from the 2112 concert footage he watched during the trip there. It was a 1974 Gibson Les Paul, the exact guitar used by Alec Lifeson during the 2112 tour. He grinned at the absurd, this is his language, Arthurian image of the guitar in stone. Like every egg hunter, he had seen John Borman's film Excalibur many times, so it seemed obvious what should be done next. He reaches out his right hand, grasps the neck of the guitar, and pulls. The guitar comes free with a prolonged metallic shring, and I don't know if that's a reference to Wayne's World or not, but he recalls that James Halliday had taken guitar lessons during high school, and that it had actually inspired Wade to learn to play guitar as well. But he never held an actual guitar, only virtual guitars like this one. So he plays the song Discovery from the 2112 album, and in a flash, the guitar transforms into the crystal key. But he thinks that he has found an advantage here. He believes that while the gate is probably found on a planet called Sithonia, which was one of the first planets that was developed by Halliday for the Oasis. If you've seen the film adaptation, this is roughly equivalent to Planet Doom. And he makes this distinction because he notices that on the crystal key, as well as on the jade and copper key before them, they all have a letter A, which stands for Anorak, and specifically mimics the banner of the door of Castle Anorak, which had been locked ever since James Halliday had passed away. So he realizes, aha, this is where the gate is located. So he beats feet, so to speak, to Sithonia. And what he discovers, though, is that when he arrives in or outside of the planet Sithonia, is that the entire planet has been locked down by a kind of force field using an object called the Orb of Ossibox. So the Sixers haven't figured out the clue just yet. They don't know they have to play guitar, but they have sealed off the planet because they feel that's where the last gate is located. So now Wade begins to formulate a very specific plan in order to gain access to the final gate. And that's where we left off in terms of the reading. So chapter 28 starts really in a really interesting manner. Specifically, Wade explains throughout this chapter that his apartment that he had rented under the name of Bryce Lynch when he moved to Columbus, Ohio, is essentially attacked by a special unit of the police called the Drop Cops. Now, Madison, what did you make of this section? Did this surprise or confuse you at all when you were initially reading the text?
It kind of sort of confused me a little bit because I was wondering why he was being attacked. I assumed it would have been like the Sixers when he was being attacked, and then I figured out it was essentially them attacking him.
Yeah, then the only real distinction between the Sixers, as we've come to know them at this point in the novel, and the Drop Cops is that the Drop Cops tend to work exclusively in reality, in the real world around the Oasis. Go ahead. Anything else?
No, that was really it.
Okay. Very well.
I mean, I thought it was very, wasn't it very, I thought it was, sorry. I'm
Okay.
getting so confused about where I'm at in the book.
Okay.
Didn't he just find out that his friend had been murdered?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Daito.
And then literally they're like breaking down the door.
It wasn't as abrupt. Like I said, he goes to talk to Shoto in chapter 25. That's Daito's brother. But in terms of the time frame within the book, we're talking maybe 24 hours notice, yeah, between the death of Daito and his apartment being attacked by the drop cops.
Right, which is scary.
Oh, absolutely. There is, potential here that they could just kill Wade. The only thing that's protecting him, of course, at this point is that the apartment and the violations that he's incurred are all being lumped onto Bryce Lynch, his alternate identity. So he's got a little bit of a protection there. So after they break down the door, which is interesting, it's a specially reinforced door, so they have to bring a welding unit in there to cut the door open. They drag Wade, and again, at this point, they're assuming he's actually still Bryce Lynch. In chapter 29, they drag him out into the real world, and we have this real interesting but short passage at the beginning of chapter 29, where Wade explains that there's a thick film of neglect that still covered everything in sight. The streets, building, and the people. Even the snow itself seemed dirty. It drifted down in gray flakes like ash after a volcanic eruption. The number of homeless people seemed to have increased drastically. Tents and cardboard shelters lined the streets, and the public parks I saw seemed to be converted into refugee camps. Again, a striking similarity for some of the things that have developed in the wake of the COVID crisis and some of the rioting that has broken out across the United States. This reminds me a lot of the descriptions and visuals that I saw in relationship to the CHOP neighborhood that rose up in Oregon a couple of weeks ago now. But continuing on, he says, as the transport rolled deeper into the city's core, I saw people clustered in every street corner and in every vacant lot, huddled around burning barrels and portable fuel cell heaters. Others waited in line at the free solar charging stations, wearing bulky, outdated visors and haptic gloves. Their hands made small, ghostly gestures as they interacted with the far more pleasant reality of the oasis via one of GSS free wireless access points. And finally, we reached 101 IOI Plaza in the heart of downtown. So he's taken to the downtown area of IOI, and he goes through a lengthy process to be inducted into these internment centers where you pay off your debt. Now, this is something that existed in the real past, and one of the biggest or most accessible points of description for this would be the work of and it escapes my memory of Charles Dickens. There we go. And if you've read any of Charles Dickens, you know that he has a fear of workhouses and a fear of these kinds of institutions that force people to perform manual labor in order to make up or excuse a debt that they may have incurred and are unable to pay back to society or to the initial lender. Dickens was extremely afraid of these places because he had to watch his father be interned there for a period of time during his youth. And so he never really forgave the people who ran these institutions. He found them to be inhuman and really horrible creations. They served a purpose within the Victorian society, though, in order to repay debts and loans through a system that was not federally enforced like the banking systems that we have today. If you default on a loan today, we go after a person's goods, right? Their cars, homes, the possessions that they own, and we resell those items to recoup the cost. Oftentimes, the cost itself is not completely recouped, but we do not usually go after the person, force them into any kind of servitude. So that's very different from the 21st century that we know. However, it seems like these repayment centers have reemerged in 2045, or at least in this dystopian version of 2045. Did you find any of this to be strange or interesting in any way, Madison?
No, so I've read a lot of historical and classic works, and like you said, it reminded me of like the poorhouses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you can't live somewhere, you don't have a job, you can't have a job, you're mentally unstable, that sort of thing, they kind of like put you in a home and remove you from society.
Yeah. Very well.
So I thought I kind of equated to that.
Yeah, and I think that's the logical link that our author, Ernest Cline, wants us to establish. So he's pulling some material from that very Dickensian story, or from those stories. He explains on page 278, the second to last full paragraph, that my indenturement contract, that's how it's referred to in the world of Ready Player One, appeared in a window on his display. It contained a long list of disclaimers and warnings about his rights or lack thereof as an indentured employee. Nancy, the kind of the process character that runs the system, told me to read it, sign it, and proceed to the indent processing unit. She then logged out of the chat room. He scrolls to the bottom of the contract without reading it, and he does so because he explains it's over 600 pages long. I like this because there's also a very subtle parallel between the kind of exclusive contracts that we as consumers today are asked to sign or agree to. And there's a lot of times, many people are signing away rights to their privacy and to their comfort, and to the disclosure of personal information that they're not even aware of, because these contracts are so long and so complicated. And he goes to the end, signs his name as Bryce Lynch, and verifies his signature with a retinal scan. He says that even though I was using a fake name, I wondered if the contract might still be legally binding. I wasn't sure and didn't really care, though. I had a plan, and this was part of it. So at this point, we realize something more is afoot, as opposed to Wade just being caught unaware. And we realize that as the chapter concludes, he has entered this facility in a very purposeful way. In the next chapter, chapter 30, we discover pretty quickly that he has agreed to take on a job as a customer service representative for IOI. And we get a little bit of fun here, mocking a customer. And I think this is fairly endemic of a lot of media from people of Klein's time and age, specifically the sort of satirical take on customer service. And if you've ever worked a customer service position, it's not particularly easy. And oftentimes people approach customer service already having generated a degree of disappointment that has nothing to do with the customer service representative, and oftentimes is an issue that either couldn't be anticipated by the department and usually is not delivered in a very salutary way. So you get to see the worst of people, and there's often little you can do to help them other than offer a smile and some human sympathy. Have you ever had to work a position like similar to this in customer service before, Madison?
Yeah, I worked at Walmart.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I worked at the bakery in Walmart. It's kind of like deciding you're gonna work in lost luggage at an airport. Nobody comes in happy to see you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I only giggled at Walmart not because I have any disdain for Walmart. I actually think Walmart's fine, but they're the largest retailer in the United States. So I laugh because I'm sure there's a time that she's met with some unhappy customers. It's just part of the game. And you said that is true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've worked for Walmart. I don't work for them anymore. I have problems with Walmart.
Fair enough.
Go to another grocery store.
So, yeah, that I can certainly empathize. Unfortunately, I've been a cranky person trying to get something, not necessarily from Walmart, but from other stores, and I've been in the position of being a customer service representative for some other stores. I worked for Kohl's for a while, and then I worked in a customer service capacity for an online retailer for a while. Not fun, but I think that Klein includes that specifically because he realizes that a large percentage of his readership has worked a very similar job. So
that's pretty much
Go ahead.
I was going to say that's pretty much the only job you can get while you're in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And even in college without a degree.
Right.
Is most likely retail.
Yeah, retail, and like you said, even if you don't work directly for customer service, you said you worked in the bakery, you still have some customer service or plenty of ample opportunity to engage in customer service relations. So we kind of read through a typical day for Bryce Lynch as an IOI customer service representative, but we find out that he has gone ahead and purchased some black market goods while he was doing relatively well in the hunt. And specifically, what he purchased on the black market was a set of IOI passwords. And he explains that the person who sold these passwords was probably within IOI and someone who's kind of a rebel against their system. And the first thing that we find out on page 288 is that he waits for 2 entire days before he tries the passwords out. But they work, luckily. And he goes in, essentially hacks into the system. And I'll say hack in, quote, air quotes here, because he has passwords. It's not quite the same thing to hack into a system if you have passwords. But
he sneaks into the
yes,
system. I think
right.
that's a good way of putting it.
Yes, I agree. He sneaks into the system. And while in the system, he finds some information, and specifically, he finds a couple of different folders marked mission status and threat assessments. The threat assessments folder has a lot of information about himself, Artemis, H, Shoto, and of course, the lately lamented Daito, which is emblazoned with a red X. He opens his own folder first, and he finds a link to a video of his aunt's trailer being bombed just after he had disagreed with Sorrento. It says that after he'd gone into hiding, IOI had lost track of me, but they had collected thousands of screenshots and video caps of my avatar, despite the fact that they didn't know anything about my location in the real world. My current whereabouts were listed as unknown. So he closes that window and opens up the file on Artemis. So we've been waiting for a while to find out a little bit more about Artemis and the real world. And we find out that she looks very close to her avatar. She has dark hair, hazel eyes, but she does have a birthmark on her face, often referred to as a port wine stain or wine splash. And then she wore a sweep of her hair over her face to cover it up. This is duplicated in the film version, and they do something really cool in the film version, is that they invert Artemis and Wade. So Artemis is actually the one who goes undercover into the belly of the beast, so to speak, as an IOI indentured servant. But Wade and his friends hack into the system and set her free inside of IOI, so she's able to find some critical passwords to shut down the Orb of Asuvox. We find out a little bit more about Artemis, though, as a character in the novel. It said that her real name is Samantha Cook, and she's 20 years old. She's from Canada, and she lives in Vancouver, British Columbia. So we also find out that there's a little video link at the bottom of our dossier, and when he selects it, he looks at a live feed of a small suburban house in his display, and he realizes that he's looking at the house where Artemis lives. So they know where Artemis is, which is potentially dangerous for her. Then he takes a look at Shoto's file. We find out his real name is Akide Karatsu, and he lives in Japan. And then H is still a mystery. They have a name listed as Henry Swanson, which was an alias used by Jack Burton in Big Trouble in Little China. So Wade realizes that they know very little to nothing about H. So even though he is protected, he still has some concerns for his friends in the Oasis. He also finds out that they have plans, as it says on page 293, of finishing off the Gunters, even if the IOI Sixer unit wins the contest. It says that once the Sixers obtained the egg and won the contest, Artemis and Shoto should be disposed of because they know where they're located. So that's above and beyond the call of villainy, I think. We also find out that they recorded, for whatever reason, the death of Daito. So now they've got some real blood on their hands in addition to the bombing of the stacks. So after that, we roll into chapter 31, and we find out that Wade works with these files, and he deletes his own files and keeps the files of his friends. And he disguises himself as a Mr. Henry Tuttle, Mr. Henry Tuttle, and he walks out of the IOI station and catches a cab, and then he goes back and deletes the Bryce Lynch identity once he's in the cab and regains his real-world identity as IOI, as Wade Watts, with now any outstanding warrants and an excellent credit rating. It's always nice to have. Around page 301, we get a little bit of theming from the real world concern. So this would be another potential topic that someone might want to write an argumentative paper about. We find out that on page 301, first full paragraph, Wade writes that I walked to an Oasis parlor located a few blocks away, a franchise outlet called The Plug. The dingy backlit sign, which featured a smiling anthropomorphic fiber optic cable, promised lightning fast Oasis access, cheap gear rental, and private immersion bays. He'd seen a lot of banner ads for The Plug online and writes that they had a reputation for high prices and outdated hardware, but their connections were supposed to be fast, reliable, and lag-free. And he says, for me, the major selling point was that they were one of the few Oasis parlor chains not owned by IOI or one of its subsidiaries. So we learned that the fate of these kind of brick and mortar constructs, which we see so much more of today, would become in this new future internet access points or Wi-Fi access points. And this is not too far outside of the realm of possibility. A lot of these former outlet malls have high speed access due to all of the fiber optic cable that surrounds them for the purpose of retail business. But now that there are no retail businesses in those spaces, what you have is a really nice spot to create a potential login source. So these one particular idea for what to do with these brick and mortar spaces might be to create cyber cafes or cyber access points that could be used for people who need to upload more documents, especially in this day of age where we have more and more people using online access to attend to things like school. If you had a really nice brick and mortar area that served as a Wi-Fi cafe or an accessible cafe, I'm sure that would pick up in value in this particular time frame. So anyhow, we find out that he sends a message to his friends using this remote access bay. And in chapter 32, he finally meets up with H once again, and Shoto and Artemis. And he explains what he's been up to and what their plans were. Interestingly, though, Artemis does finally spill some information. She says that she's safe, that she relocated from her house to the Vancouver airport. And they make a decision to finally come together and join forces. And that's pivotal because it was theoretically, or you could argue that the earlier rejection from the various Gunters to join together made them weaker and probably resulted in the death of Daito. So he says that they haven't figured out how to open the crystal gate just yet. This is on page 306. And then Shoto says, "You've got to be kidding." But he shakes his head. And then Artemis says, You're not kidding? How is that even possible? Sorrento has the crystal key and knows where the gate is. All he has to do is open it up and step inside. And Wade explains that was true for the first 2 gates, but there's a 3rd gate is different. He's like, check this out. And he opens up a video stream from the Sixers video archive. And the video clip opens with a shot of Sorrento's avatar standing outside of the front gates of Castle Anorak. The gate's front entrance, which had been impregnable, swung open as Sorrento approached. The castle entrance will open for an avatar who holds a copy of the crystal key, Wade explains. If an avatar doesn't have a copy of the key, he can't cross the threshold. They continue to watch the video feed as Sorrento passes through the entrance and into the gold line foyer. His avatar crosses the polished floor and approaches the large crystal door set into the north wall. There's a keyhole in the very center of the door, and directly above it, there are 3 words etched into the door's glittering, faceted surface: charity, hope, and faith. Sorrento steps forward, holds out his copy of the crystal key, puts it into the keyhole, but nothing happens. He glances at the 3 words printed on the top and repeats them aloud, but nothing happens. And he watches Artemis and H and Shoto as they watch the video as well. So Wade says, whenever Sorrento's logged in, he has a team of consultants and researchers watching his every move. You can hear their voices on some of the vid caps. And so they try a variety of things, but none of them work. And he says that faith, hope, and charity are, and this is a particularly happy, geeky moment for me, are chords of a line from Schoolhouse Rock called 3 the Magic Number. I remember one of my first girlfriends in high school reminded me about this little song. And so when I read that, I yeah, that's right. It's the magic number. And so I got a real kick out of that personally. In any event, we now know that there is a Schoolhouse Rock connection to completing this challenge. And in order to do it, Wade and his forces are going to have to get around the force field. Now, Wade luckily has some information about how to take down the force fields, but he realizes that this is not going to be enough, that even if they get the force fields down, they still have to contend with an army of Sixers, thanks to IOI's presence on Planet Doom, or as it's referred to in this novel, Planet Sithonia. So, Madison, last question for today. How does Wade plan on taking down IOI, or how does he plan on getting access to this planet once the force field is down?
Well, he has set bombs.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like the movie.
Yep, very similar to the movie.
That are all set to go off with robots programmed to set them off.
Yep.
Because he was in the system and he put in the orders.
Absolutely. So that's
Oh,
right.
so they should bring down the shields from the inside rather than the outside, because it's impossible from the outside, but it is from the inside.
Correct. And so he doesn't necessarily explain that just yet, but you are correct. That's what happens. And but he's pretty confident that the robots that he has access will do exactly what he's programmed them to do. And that was a perfect explanation. Thank you. But then Z says, even if, or H says, I trust you, Z, but even if that shield does drop, to reach the castle, we'll have to fight our way through the largest army in the Oasis. And so what about these guys and all their tanks and their gunships? So Wade admits that they will need some help, and Artemis clarifies by saying, you're actually going to need a lot of help. And so Wade sends a message out to the entire Oasis to join together in one last hellacious battle against IOI to win over the Oasis. So he actually has a little speech that he types out and sends out through as a video message. And he says, the three of us are going to need to reach the gate together. Artemis, H, and of course, Parzival. And with that in mind, we find out that there's only one more obstacle, which Artemis says, or she, which is that we need to get access to the Oasis. And Artemis says, I don't realize if you have forgotten this, but I'm homeless and on the run for my life currently. And a public access terminal at an airport probably won't provide enough bandwidth to do what we want to do. And Wade says, I've got the same problem. I don't have a lot of access right now. But H reveals that he has an RV and says, you can all come and crash with me, but I don't think I can make it to Columbus, Vancouver, and Japan in the next 36 hours. But then a voice sort of issues forth, an invisible voice within H's little basement hideaway. And we realize that it belongs to none other than Ogden Morrow. Now, in case you haven't been keeping up with this character, Ogden Morrow was the partner of James Halliday when they created the Oasis. So he's kind of like the Paul McCartney to Halliday's John Lennon, or the Steve Wozniak.
Ringo Starr.
Yes, that's right. And so he offers his home in Oregon as a place of safety to the High Five, so that they can come to his home and be safe from IOI in the real world as they launch their last-ditch effort to win back the Oasis in the virtual world. So that's where we are after having read this week's readings. Any other thoughts or ideas that you wanted to put out there, Madison?
No.
Okay. Very well. I think that this is a really fun section of the book that you will read for next week. And I know that a lot of you are not going to be focused on the reading necessarily. You'll be focused on the writing of your essay, which I totally understand, and I think is probably the right decision to make for the rest of this week. Now, one last thing that I do want to bring up, though, before we close out today's session, is just that the last chapters, 33 to 38, will go relatively quickly. So if you don't get a chance to read this week, maybe this weekend after you've got your paper written and I'm grading the assignments, or even into the last week of class, I do encourage anybody who has not completed the book to push ahead on those last 5 chapters, because the writing is pretty intense. It's pretty quick. It's a pretty quick paced group of chapters, and I think you'll enjoy reading that section, the final battles and the wrap up to the novel. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about. Number 2, I probably won't Zoom officially like this on Wednesday or Thursday this week, but I will be available during this time frame, right? The standard class time frame runs from about 9 a.m. to about 10:40 a.m. So I'll be available online for you if you need a resource. And then if you need to reach me outside of those time frames, that's fine. Don't hesitate to do that. Just give me a few moments to respond to your questions and queries. And I will get back to you as quickly as I can. All right, I'm going to stop our recording, and then Madison, I'll hang out for a few more minutes if you have questions or concerns. But this is Mr. Fowler wishing you a pleasant day and an even better tomorrow. Take care, everybody.